Adam.
Hi, Lex.
So today's topic is, why should you ask for help instead of asking for business?
That's a great question, Lex. It harkens back to a story well into my early part of my career, probably about 7-8 years into my career. I was running into the situation where, as a financial advisor, I wanted to work up market. I wanted to work with wealthier people, because the reality is that when you kind of start your business, you get into a niche and you start working with the same kind of people. And eventually you want to start working up market because there's just more revenue, it's more opportunity, less time, so forth. But as a young advisor, as an early CFP, I had a hard time with this because I always felt maybe I didn't have accessibility. Maybe I wasn't good enough yet. I wasn't established. Maybe I didn't have enough brand. I had an epiphany moment where I actually asked for help and not for the business. And it's a story that a lot of advisors can relate to. I had somebody in my natural market. In other words, I could have the ability to pick up the phone and talk to them about personal stuff, who was very wealthy, very successful, very humble, and had to become almost family by choice, right? People that we saw every year. And one of the things that was kind of really intimidating to me, I never asked them for the business because I felt between this personal relationship as well as this opportunity to help and bring value to the conversation, I really didn't know where to start. And I'm sure a lot of advisors and professionals can relate, because how do you break that barrier that you create for yourself, which is maybe I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, etc. Or they're too wealthy, they're better than me. And I think that one of the things that happened is I was spending time with this family. I learned that they were friends with Malcolm Forbes, that they golfed with some of the biggest names that were in the newspaper. It was very intimidating. But I realized something early when I created Asset Map, is that Asset Map as a engagement tool was really effective at starting conversation without forcing an intimidating discussion. In other words, I didn't have to get into the technical nuances of tax or investment or insurance right out of the gate. I could talk about structure, and I could talk about intention. I could talk about priorities and the people that mattered. So I actually created an asset map for this family, and I asked for help. I reached out to the patriarch of the family, and I said, listen, I really need your help. I'd like your guidance and feedback on something that I'm using with my clients, and I'd love to understand how you think I should use it with your peers. And it took about 6 months to get that meeting with him. He reached out to me and said, yes, I'll meet you at 7:00 in the morning at my house before my driver picks me up to take me into the city. He was the president of a major global financial services company. He was willing to meet me, and I got up at 5 a.m. and I drove up there to meet with him for coffee. And we sat down and I said, here's what I need help with. And I showed him an asset map of a family that was very similar to him. And I made up all this information was kind of anecdotal from what wealthy people dealt with. A lot of complexity, houses, multiple income sources, assets all over the place. And he looked at it and he didn't really say very much in the beginning. But he said, okay, I understand it. I see where everything is. And he was getting it quickly as a very astute, financial, experienced person. But it wasn't until a moment later when his wife walks in her bathrobe from the morning, it was that early, surprised to see me there, and said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm asking for help. And she saw the document, the asset map that he was looking at. She literally ripped it from his hands. And she said, what is this? And I explained to him, it's a visualization of all of the financial instruments that you have in a household, and shows the complexity where everything's buried, like a treasure map. She looked at him and she said, do we have this? He said, well, we have spreadsheets, we have accounts, we have brokers, we have statements. She looked at me, she says, I'd like you to make one of these for me. And I realized in that moment that I was actually talking to the wrong person. The reality for most of us in advice is one of the things that we can deliver to people is clarity, is simplicity, is the possibility of being included in the conversation. Whereas in the past, she was literally at almost the age of 80, she was literally put out from every conversation because it was inaccessible. And that process, actually doing that asset map for them, uncovered millions of dollars of problems, tax bombs, inappropriate investments that it took me a year to fix. But I then got permission to fix it because I revealed it, and the family saved tens of millions of dollars in expenses and taxes. Looking back at that now, 20 years later, it's been an amazing impact to the family just because we got the insight that was hidden from them for so long. And I think the real takeaway for most of us as professionals is sometimes we need to ask people for help instead of asking them to do the business, because in doing so, they can perceive, wow, there's some real value that you're bringing to the table that perhaps I want.
So how did that distinction affect your practice after that experience?
Well, it was certainly an eye opener for me that perhaps wealthy individuals, just like all of us, need help. And perhaps we're just not asking them enough. We make a presumption too often that people with complexity and people with real needs are just getting their needs met. I mean, this is a story where the person was working with the number one advisor in their company, had 50 years of investment experience, some of the best attorneys available money could buy, and yet they were not all coordinated and they were literally working against each other because they had no transparency. So the thing for me was I noticed two things that are really important. I hope people remember this. Number one is there's a great number of people who need help and have complexity, and they just need an outlet. If you ask for help, sometimes it gives them the door opener to not feel like you're just coming in to take. You're asking for them there to contribute back to you. And in that, you're giving them, I would say, a very low intimidation, low expectation entree into starting a conversation that could be very intimate. Number two is it allowed me to now get over my own fear and anxiety that I was not good enough, or that they would never work with me, or I can't work with them. I'm too young. And it allowed me a process and a method of saying, hey, let me show you what I'm doing for other people that's been really effective. And it made an intimidating process really just accessible. I encourage all the advisors out there to rethink their own limiting beliefs around who they can work with, but lead with value, right? Show them something else that you can do or that you're doing for their peers that is highly relatable. And I wouldn't be surprised if you start opening up the right kinds of conversations. One of the more revealing aspects of that story that I hope everybody really thinks about too is sometimes we have to reframe who our customer is and who we need to engage with. There's no question that a great number of families have what we call a default CFO, somebody in the family who's likely charged with managing the money. And of course, they have more insight. They know where more of the assets are, where the incomes are. Maybe they do the tax returns, and the other party is just trusting them. But we need to, as financial professionals, recognize that we're not just dealing with one person and one decision maker in the family, right? This is often an equal decision. It's just they're not as present. And so sometimes engaging our under-engaged partner or under-engaged spouse is really the key to starting that relationship. Make sure their needs are met, because there's usually a very large gap in their awareness, their understanding, and their inclusion. And I think a modern advisor can be more thoughtful about how they bring them into the conversation. AssetMap is really geared for this, of course. We've been doubling down on really that conversational financial planning that really is the future of all financial advice delivery.